Kenny's Steph stood frozen in the middle of the office. His phone was still in his hand. His daughter's school had just called again. Miriam was sick, not just a little cold, the kind of sick that made a child cry quietly instead of loudly. He looked toward his boss's glass office. Mrs. Peters was already watching him. The room felt heavy. Every coworker seemed to sense something was about to happen. Kenny took a slow breath and stepped forward. He had asked for understanding before. It never went well. But today felt different. Worse. Before we go deeper into this case, take a second and hit the subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Kenny's Steph stood frozen in the middle of the office. His phone was still in his hand. His daughter's school had just called again. Miriam was sick, not just a little cold, the kind of sick that made a child cry quietly instead of loudly. He looked toward his boss's glass office. Mrs. Peters was already watching him. The room felt heavy. Every coworker seemed to sense something was about to happen. Kenny took a slow breath and stepped forward. He had asked for understanding before. It never went well. But today felt different. Worse. Before we go deeper into this case, take a second and hit the subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Kenny opened his mouth to speak, but Mrs. Peters spoke first. Her voice was sharp, cold. Kids aren't an excuse. The words hit harder than anything else. Kenny didn't react right away. He just stood there. Then something in him shifted, and when he finally spoke, why did the entire office fall silent? Kenny Steph woke up every day before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. His alarm rang at 4:45 a.m. He would sit up slowly, already tired. Some mornings he didn't even remember falling asleep. The small apartment was quiet, too quiet. Miriam slept in the next room, her tiny chest rising and falling. She was the only calm thing in his life. Kenny would stand there for a moment, just watching her, as if that alone gave him strength. Then the day would begin. He made breakfast, packed her lunch, checked her homework, ironed his only good shirt. Everything had to be done fast. There was no room for mistakes. Money was always tight. Time was always tighter. Miriam would wake up slowly, rubbing her eyes, calling for him in a soft voice. "Daddy." That one word made everything worth it, even the exhaustion, even the stress. He would smile, even when he didn't feel like it. They would eat together, simple food, nothing fancy, but they laughed sometimes, and that mattered. By 6:30 a.m. they were out the door. Kenny held her hand tightly. He dropped her at school, always with the same promise, "I'll be back." But deep down he worried, every single day. What if he was late again? What if something went wrong? Work was not forgiving. Kenny worked in a small office, a place where performance meant everything and excuses meant nothing. Mrs. Peters ran the place. She believed in discipline, in results, in control. To her, personal life stayed at home, no exceptions. Kenny tried to keep up. He really did, but life didn't always cooperate. Sometimes Miriam got sick. Sometimes school called. Sometimes things just fell apart. And every time it happened, Kenny felt the same fear, losing his job. Claudia Jefferson noticed him. She always did. She would pass by his desk and quietly ask if he was okay. Sometimes she left coffee without saying a word. Kenny appreciated that, more than he could explain. But not everyone was kind. Teddy Cassio made it obvious. He didn't hide his frustration. "You're always distracted," Teddy would say. "This is a job, not a daycare."
Kenny would stay quiet. He didn't have the energy to argue. Every day felt like walking on a thin line. Too slow and he would fall behind. Too distracted and he would be judged. Too human and he would be punished. At night he came home drained. But the day wasn't over. Miriam needed help with homework. Dinner had to be made. Clothes had to be washed. There was no break. Sometimes after she slept, Kenny sat alone, in silence,
thinking, wondering how long he could keep going like this. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. If you were in Kenny's position, trying to balance everything alone, what would weigh on you the most? Because Kenny wasn't just tired. He was running out of time, and he didn't even know it yet. The call came at 10:12 a.m. Kenny stared at his phone, his heart already sinking. The school's number flashed on the screen. He knew what it meant. He stepped away from his desk, answered quietly. "Miriam isn't well," the voice said. "She's asking for you." Kenny closed his eyes. Not again. He looked around the office. People were working, typing, talking, normal, but his world had just shifted. He walked toward Mrs. Peters' office. Each step felt heavier than the last. He knocked. "Come in." Her voice was firm. Kenny stepped inside, held his phone tightly. "My daughter is sick," he said softly. "I need to pick her up." Mrs. Peters didn't respond right away. She just stared at him. Then she leaned back in her chair. "This is becoming a pattern," she said. Kenny swallowed hard. "I understand, but—" She cut him off. "No, Kenny, you don't understand." Her tone sharpened. "We have deadlines. We have responsibilities." Kenny nodded slowly. "I know." "Then act like it." The words hit deep. He felt eyes on him. The office was quiet now. Everyone was listening. "Kids aren't an excuse," Mrs. Peters said clearly. The silence that followed was loud. Kenny felt something break inside him. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Humiliation. Teddy smirked from across the room. Claudia looked down, uncomfortable. Kenny stood there, frozen. What was he supposed to say? That he was trying? That he was doing his best? Would it matter? Mrs. Peters continued, "If you leave now, don't expect special treatment later." That was the moment. The line drawn. Kenny's mind raced. If he stayed, Miriam would be alone, sick, scared. If he left, his job could be at risk. Everything he had built, everything he depended on, gone. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. If you were standing where Kenny stood, forced to choose between your child and your job, what would you do in that moment? Kenny looked at the floor. His hands trembled slightly. He thought about Miriam, her small voice, her tired eyes. "Daddy!" That was all it took. He looked up again, but this time something in his eyes had changed, and no one in that office was ready for what he was about to say next. Kenny didn't speak right away. He just stood there, breathing slowly. The room felt tighter, like the walls were closing in. Mrs. Peters watched him closely, waiting. Teddy leaned back in his chair, almost enjoying the moment. Claudia kept her eyes on her desk, but her hands had stopped moving. Everyone was listening. Kenny finally spoke. His voice was calm, but heavy. "I show up every day," he said. Mrs. Peters didn't react. "I meet my deadlines," he continued. "I stay late when I can." A pause. "But I'm also a father." The words hung in the air. Mrs. Peters leaned forward. "And this is a workplace," she replied. Kenny nodded slowly. "I know." His hands tightened slightly.
but my daughter doesn't stop needing me because I'm at work." The tension grew. Teddy scoffed quietly. "That's life," he muttered. Kenny heard him, but didn't respond. Instead, he looked back at Mrs. Peters. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Kenny said. "I'm asking for understanding." Mrs. Peters stood up. Her chair slid back sharply. "This company cannot function around your personal life," she said firmly. The words were final, cold. Kenny felt his chest tighten. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she right? Was he failing? At work? At home? At everything? He thought about the bills, the rent, the food on the table. He thought about Miriam again, alone, waiting, sick. That image pushed the doubt away. Kenny took a step back, then another, not out of fear, but decision. "I have to go," he said quietly. Mrs. Peters crossed her arms. "If you walk out that door, there will be consequences." The room went still. No one moved. No one spoke. Kenny turned toward the exit. Each step felt like a risk, like everything was about to fall apart. Claudia looked up at him, her eyes full of concern. Teddy shook his head. "Unbelievable," he whispered. Kenny reached the door. His hand touched the handle. For a split second he hesitated. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Before he opened the door, take a second to think about this. If you had everything on the line like Kenny, job, stability, your child's future, would you still walk out? Share your thoughts below, because this moment defines more than just a decision. Kenny closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened the door and walked out. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument. No one expected him to actually do it. Not Mrs. Peters, not Teddy, not even Claudia. But he did, and now there was no going back. Kenny drove faster than usual. His hands gripped the wheel tightly. His mind raced with fear. What had he just done? He pushed the thought away. Miriam needed him. That was all that mattered. When he arrived at the school, she was sitting quietly, small, pale. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy!" Kenny rushed to her, knelt down, held her gently. "I'm here," he whispered. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the job, not the consequences, just her. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. A knock on the door. Kenny opened it. Mrs. Kazia stood there. She held a small bag.
"I heard Miriam wasn't well," she said softly. Kenny was surprised. "I made some soup," she added. He didn't know what to say. Kindness like that felt rare. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled. "You're doing your best," she said. Those words hit differently. Not judgment, not pressure, just understanding. Kenny felt his eyes sting. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. The next day, something even more unexpected happened. Claudia called him. "You need to come in," she said. Her voice sounded urgent. Kenny's heart sank. Was this it? Had he been fired? But something in her tone felt different. Not fear, hope. Kenny didn't know what was waiting for him, but he knew one thing. Everything was about to change. Kenny walked into the office slowly. The atmosphere felt different, quieter. He noticed the HR manager standing near Mrs. Peters' office. Claudia gave him a small nod. "Just go in," she whispered. Kenny took a deep breath, then stepped inside. Mrs. Peters sat at her desk. The HR manager stood beside her. Kenny braced himself, but what came next wasn't what he expected.
"We reviewed the situation," the HR manager said calmly. Kenny listened carefully. "There were concerns raised about how things were handled yesterday." Mrs. Peters didn't speak. She looked different, less certain. The HR manager continued. "This workplace must also respect reasonable human circumstances." Kenny felt a shift. Something was changing. "You made your priorities clear," the HR manager said, "and that matters." Kenny didn't respond. He just listened. Mrs. Peters finally spoke. Her voice was quieter now. "We may need to revisit some policies," she said. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, more than before. Kenny nodded slowly, not in victory, but in understanding. Things weren't perfect, but they were different, better. Claudia smiled at him later that day. Teddy said nothing. For the first time, Kenny didn't feel small in that office. He felt seen, and that changed everything. Kenny's life didn't suddenly become easy. He still woke up early, still rushed through mornings, still worried about bills, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt like his struggles had to be hidden. Miriam got better. Her laughter filled the apartment again, and every time she smiled, Kenny felt stronger. Not because life was perfect, but because he chose what mattered most. There are moments in life where everything is on the line, moments where you have to choose, not between right and wrong, but between fear and love. Kenny chose love, and even though it cost him something in the moment, it gave him something greater in return: respect, clarity, strength. Before we close, think about this for a second. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you had to stand your ground, even when it was scary? Share that moment below, because stories like yours matter too. And if this story touched you in any way, take a second to like this video. If you're a single parent out there doing your best every single day, I want you to know something. You are seen. Your effort matters. Your love matters. And you are not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us your story. Let's build a space where people understand each other a little more. And if you believe in stories that remind us of strength, resilience, and quiet courage, make sure you subscribe to this channel, The Redeemed Single Dad, because there are more stories like this waiting for you. Stories that reflect real life, real struggle, and real hope. Thank you for watching.